Welcome. Welcome to the podcast Following Spirit Without Hesitation, Stories from Journeys of Deepening Trust. And I'm Tania, and I'm here to continue what I believe will be the Magic Road series. And this is the Unexpected Pilgrimage, so it's the second part. So let's see where we go with that. And there's a few things that of the backstory that I would like to mention, because I didn't mention them in the first part. So first of all, I'm back in Scotland for a short while, and my dog Pippa and my van are in Austria. And the first thing I would like to bring in is, if you may remember, I connected with that mermaid energy in Holy Isle. And when I was going through the Eurotunnel, which, if you think, it goes under the water, under the English Channel, and so there's a lot of density of water. So the heat in the tunnel is quite palpable as you're going through. At least I found that, especially the first time. And it kind of put me into this trance, and I was really connecting with the Merpeople energy and the dolphins and the whales that were coming in. And there was this sense of, there was this shelf of land, of rock that we were working on, and we were working on building this connection. My understanding is that this was originally part of a land bridge between the continents, between Britain and the main European continent. So we'd been working on that. The other part was about the cherry harvest, following the spirit of cherry across Europe. And you may remember, like, it was early May when I left here, and the blossom, I mean, I've never seen cherry blossom like that. There was so much. And it was really beautiful. And then when I reached Italy, it was the first that they have an early cherry harvest, which is in May. So it was that sense of, like, through France, the cherries were just starting. And then by the time I got to Italy, the first ones were ripening, and then they continued to ripen throughout the summer. So that was a significant thread through the journey. You know, there's a lot of trees that weave themselves through this journey and bringing their wisdom as well. And cherry was the main one. And later on, to really complete that, I talked about framing. I had a little travel drum made by a friend of mine, and he was able to do that with a cherry wood hoop. So that was for me to complete that. And before I went over the Alps, or the main Alps, shall we say, the peaks, I stopped in Turin. And there was a couple of reasons I wanted to go there, some practical reasons, but also there's the Egyptian Museum there, which has a collection of activated Sekhmet statues, as well as some other significant artifacts. So that was also part of connecting in with that energy. I remember there was this huge ram there that I was really drawn to. That sense, I guess, if you look at Ram, Aries, New Beginnings, it was just this massive head of a ram. And anyhow, part of that, when I was walking through Turin and I was going to this, to the museum, and the police, again, had blocked off one road, so I couldn't go that way. I'm not sure why. So there was no pedestrian access or car access down this particular road. So I had to go around another way. And I went past this church, and I was just drawn to go inside this church or this chapel. And from the outside, there was no indication of what that was about. And my understanding of that when I was in there was it was in dedication to the Exodus, which, you know, really came from that area, again, from Egypt, that Exodus. And it was so rich in symbolism. But the thing that sticks in my mind was that there were statues of the apostles, which weren't really aligned with what I'm familiar with from the Bible. And there were some female apostles as well. And Sophia was mentioned. And there was also, for me, what looked like, you know, the indication of the creation. There was a lot of spider spider energy, grandmother spider energy there, brought in through Art Deco kind of aspects. So, like I say, rich in symbolism. Threads, okay, that are part of this story as it unfolds. So yeah, I'm back in Scotland and, wondering why I'm here, but clearly there's a need to anchor in the energy and have that energetic exchange with the land. There was a practical reason as well. I had a friend who'd been looking after my cat, and I'd organised someone, a house sitter, to come and look after my cat. So there was that sense of needing to bring that person in and show them around and just sort of complete that preparation of the house. So I return back to Austria, and Vienna, which is where I land, my final landing point, has a very strong patriarchal energy, particularly that I found throughout most of Austria. This very strong masculine energy anyhow, but particularly in Vienna, there's this, it's the home of philosophy, the home of psychoanalysis, and then of course it was also occupied during World War II. So there was this sense of really trying to soften that, shall we say, soften that energy. And yet when my friend was staying, she took me to a place that's known as the Green Heart of Austria, which I just think that's just beautiful. And this sort of Green Heart of Austria is surrounded by mountains that were volcanoes. And there is folklore around the dragons that were present. Volcanoes are often associated with dragons, but she told me about that folklore, and the energy there was definitely very different from the rest of Austria. It's really very beautiful. So yeah, at this point, when I was also in Turin, it was just after the Eurovision Song Contest, and I hadn't realized it was literally the day after. So they were still clearing up, and there were all these stars placed, on the pavement in this park that I ended up in. I didn't know why I was there. Again, the crows came, and the crows took me in a certain direction. I had 4 crows come, and it was like, so I just followed the crows. And so I was in this park, and there was a bit of work to do there as well. But there were stars on the pavements with the names of the different countries and the people representing them in the contest. And the one that really stuck with me was Croatia. Then it was like, okay. And I think this was one of the seeds that was being planted, is if I'm in Austria, do I go backtrack, or do I actually go full circle? And I was already aware, I'd mentioned about the A1 earlier, that I kept picking up A1s, A11s, A111s, these roads that I associated with Roman roads, but also the sense of these numbers. So it felt, I was going to be going to Rome, and it's like, well, how am I going to go there? And I thought, well, I might as well continue, through Austria and drop down to the coast and come back round that. And so that's what I decided to do. I had someone I knew in Hungary, who I knew through Sweat Lodge ceremony as a firekeeper. And I have a good friend in Serbia. So I thought, well, I'm as well to go and visit these people on my way through, and drop down to the coast, which is Croatia, and then continue back round through Slovenia to Italy. So that then became the new plan. And so that's what I did. And the journey pretty much continued as it had done. Like I say, it was this really immersive experience, and I was taken to places that were really, really significant and very potent, and also, if you like, waymarkers. And what was really noticeable was when I crossed the border from Austria into Hungary was the shift in energy. Hungary, for me, has such a strong feminine energy. It's palpable. It is so, and so therefore the contrast between Austria, which overall held this sort of very strong masculine energy, very patriarchal in some places, more than others. But it was a strong feminine energy. Um, and almost straight away, I was seeing statues, because a lot of these places, they all have shrines. There's a lot of shrines throughout Europe, more in some countries than others. But you could see that the statues were more in celebration of the feminine. I was in rural Hungary at this point. Um, and and I could almost just see, as I went through some of the villages, just the interaction between the men and women. It was very different, you know. So the first place that I stopped at before I got to my friends, at least it was a while ago now, but let's talk about this place, because I'm trying to remember now, was it before or after? But it was a place where, again, that was in honor of Mother Mary. And it's where someone who was probably later sainted, during a time of drought, had managed to find water or connect to a spring. One of these sort of really sort of magical, these miracles that happen. So it was all around that energy, and it felt really, really potent. It was a really interesting little church, and I guess shrine, and it also did feel contained as well. And at this point, this is when mulberry started to come through. I started to find the mulberries, and mulberry is about abundance, and throughout that journey in Hungary, I came across white, red, and black mulberries. There's the three different colors. So, so it's very beautiful. I didn't stop in Budapest, and but drove through that. And my friend was living by a lake, and it was really interesting to sort of, as a sort of approaching the lake, to really feel this sense of capitalism that was starting to grow up around the lake. And I differentiate capitalism from patriarchy. It was very different. And but it almost felt like it was the beginnings of that, and there was this kind of almost this juxtaposition. The land wasn't comfortable with that and what was happening, and my understanding is that that this used to be a place that a lot of people, they'd have their little I guess hunters' lodges. Maybe that's not what they were, but they were places where families would maybe go and visit during certain times of the year. And as there were, you could find remnants of these places near where my friend lived. these sort of family homes, and then of course you're having this more sort of capitalist affluent building that'd been happening probably for a few decades. So it was really curious, but the lake there is really very, very magical, and definitely this huge dragon energy. So there was this really strong, this feminine dragon energy that was within this lake. And when we went to the other side of the lake, it's very different. It's a contrast. It was still kind of like, shall we say, the old way. But there was mountains, and there's an old volcano there, and there's this walk, go around this ring of fire, and we go around this ring of fire. So, and this volcanic activity that had been there. But again, this was like dragon energy. And so to be in those woods around that ancient volcano, and we came across this part, and it was like, these are the draws of the dragon. Okay. So I'd been guided. I'd brought some things for ceremony, and my friend had his own little ceremony, but I was guided to go further up into the jaws of the dragon and have my own ceremony with the land there. And what I was shown was, I mentioned before, I don't know much about galactic history, shall we say, so I can only mention what I have been shown. Yeah. So this was very much about this pair of dragons, this divine union of dragons, if you like, and there was some sort of war, or they were under attack, and as she was coming to the ground, crashing to the ground or into the lake, he came to rescue her, and it was almost literally held in stasis. He was holding her head so it was above the water. And this is when I was told this was about the two. That's when the information started to come through. This is about the two. And then later on, there was about the three, and then there was about the one. So that's when that information started to come through. And so we kind of worked with that dragons and worked with that divine union, if you like, that had been held in stasis through that pair of dragons, the water dragon and the fire dragon. And you may know, that water is the feminine, fire is the masculine, and that union of fire and water is where the magic is, to try and understand that connection between those two elements. So So for me, it felt like a strange order, the two, the three, and the one. But of course, the union produces the child, the divine child. And then, of course, the child is the one. And so the cycle starts again. The child comes into union and then produces a divine child. And then there's the three. And this is also our own inner process as well. We unite the masculine and feminine aspects within ourselves, and we produce our divine child, our divine self. And this is a kind of ever evolving dynamic, if you like. There's sort of multiple layers, I guess, as you go through the different sort of dimensional processes. I just feel called to bring in, there's a fourth element to that, and that's the part that I call the elder as well. So, but the elder almost like it holds the space for that, shall we say, for the sake of this. So we did that that work in Hungary, and it's such a beautiful country. And also, this is where the white stag, that's right, let's go back to the white stag. So as I'm leaving Switzerland, before I go into Austria, I might not be getting this geographically correct, or even linear time correct, shall we say, but yeah, without checking my notes, but it's a story. Okay. So I'm at this campsite on the border, and I remember it because there were cows there, and they're bells, right? They have big bells around their neck. So it was beautiful, being there and listening to the sound of these cow bells. And it was a beautiful sunny day. And I thought I'd go out for a walk in the evening. I had my torch with me. And it was a lovely little campsite. And I went out for this walk, and there was a thunderstorm. And I mentioned about the thunderstorms following me. And there was by the edge of this woodland, there was this little shrine. And there was enough room, to have shelter. But this shrine was in dedication of Saint Hubert. And Saint Hubert has this connection with the white stag. He is a little bit like those of you who are familiar with the biblical story of St. Paul on the road to Damascus, who sees the light and is brought to his knees by that. St. Hubert also has a similar story. He's a hunter, and he's hunting the white stag, and then has this mystical experience of seeing the light come between the antlers of the stag. And it's such a beautiful story. I've written a post about that, a blog post, which it will be linked below, because it is such a beautiful story. And so my understanding of the white stag is perhaps different from how others talk about that. And then more recently, when I was visiting my son in China, and we went to the Silk Road and the Tibetan part of China, the white stag shows up again. So it just shows that the white stag is part of these networks from Asia, from Europe. And for me, it centers in Hungary, that these pilgrimage networks, for me, the white stag, this really feels that the white stag centers in Hungary, because in that story, it shows it's really the stag is not a stag. It's a doe or a hind, a female deer. And of course the light, or what they're considered to be the antlers, the light is the light of the divine feminine. And it's how the masculine follows that light of the divine feminine to found community. Like I say, there's more in the blog post. And so it's the divine feminine, it represents the divine feminine, it represents the divine mother. And I believe, from my understanding at this moment in time, is that Hungary is central to that. I believe that is where it's almost like all the white stag roads seem to end up in Hungary. The founding of that community in honor of the divine feminine, bringing that into balance. So, and my friend also told me, and I've not verified this, but that the Hun in Hungary means light. So that for me really is a confirmation of course, what I experienced, the divine union, and the founding of a new community. And fair enough, maybe in that story with the dragons, that was blocked in some way. So I'm sure there's more to share around that. But have a look at my blog post. I lay out my understanding of the story around that. Obviously, I wrote that before my experience in China. So yeah, so from Hungary, I then go to Serbia. This is where it gets interesting. Um, and I have a few more stories around, Hungary, just with that, again, that connection with the feminine and some of the places that I discovered along the way. But let's get to the border. So I'm at the border. And fortunately, when I was back in Scotland, I picked up some paperwork, but which I hadn't brought with me before. So I'm at Hungary, I'm at the border, and one of the things that's interesting is that because the rules had changed about traveling with animals, even though I had a European passport for Pippa with, all evidence of the vaccinations that she needed to be traveling and, other sort of medical, veterinary medication or whatever it was. It was no longer needed because there was now this new medical certificate, but the old passport still acted as a record, if you like. So I got to the border of Hungary, and so the guy at the border then asked me for my documentation, which I gave him, and of course he wasn't familiar with the new documentation. So fortunately I had Pippa's passport, so I was able to give that to him. And then he wanted my car documents, and I was like, I hadn't had the car that long, and I hadn't got the new owner's registration. But what I did have, which I picked up when I went back to Scotland, was the slip to show that. And so I gave that to him, and he was like, no, you're just going to have to turn around and go back. And I'm thinking, no, I'm not. And he said that a few times, and Spirit just came through and said, ask him if there's anything else he can do, because I knew he could make a phone call. And so I stood my ground. I didn't get angry. I stayed calm, which if I hadn't have had the experience that I had during my journey around the UK, my figure of 8 journey around the UK, I wouldn't have been able to stay that calm. I was just completely like, well, is there anything else you can do? And he just went, and off he went and made the phone call. And then, of course, I was allowed through. And I have so much gratitude because, as I say, it's without having had that experience the year before, I would have probably got quite nervous or anxious, or other things would have come up, and that would have shown. But because I was able to keep my cool and my calm and just speak my truth or speak my requests, he accepted it and acted on it. So that I was very grateful about that. So then I go through the middle bit and get to the border of Serbia. and again, then I'm met by the police and the customs officers and that, and I'm asked to pull over to a special section so that they can search the vehicle. And they're asking me all these questions. And one of them was really lovely. And I think he recognized something in me. What exactly? He was just wanting me to go. But the other two, there was another woman and a man, they were being quite officious. So, and then he'd ask me a question like, have you got any honey? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, oh, no. And I'd bought various jars of honey along the way. I love honey, and I love that I bought wild garlic honey in Hungary anyhow, which is a speciality. So, but I only had a few random jars of honey. I wasn't trying to export massive quantities of it. So I think he was quite relieved, when they finally agreed that I could go on my way. So there I was in Serbia. And once, because I entered Serbia, then I had no mobile. yeah, I had no mobile reception. So I had a Roma thing, but where I could go around Europe, and so I'd still get connection and everything else on my phone. But that didn't apply to Serbia. So that got a little bit tricky to try and connect with my friend. And then again, I was on I think it was the A111, 111 in Serbia. Serbia felt very much like a break. I met with my friend, who's a very dear friend, and we spent some time together. I mean, we went to some beautiful places, some amazing churches, and again picked up on the dragon energies, and there was also a particular saint that as well that we connected with, and I still have some of her the oil that's been blessed in her honor. So again, that feminine energy, but Serbia feels very, to me anyhow, very, very fragmented. I mean, there's been so many wars in that part of the world. I mean, it's been completely devastated, and in Serbia and in places of Croatia, but in Serbia particularly, there's evidence of that, and it's almost left there deliberately as a reminder of what happened. And I also feel this whole, through the Balkans. And again, my friend in Hungary explained to me that, why do you think they're always trying to attack us? I'll leave that one there. Why do you think there's all of this energy? Yeah, trying to reduce the country, because my friend in Serbia is Hungarian. Is that how I say it? That's Hungarian is her first language. So that was a beautiful time, but it felt very much like a break, a rest. Yes, to connect with these beautiful places. And for me, that there's that real strong sense is you can feel the energies in a place, but also it's like I'm in this bubble and it is not for me to be working with. And so I can receive, but it's not for me to be working with. Yeah. So I had a beautiful time in Serbia. And then from Serbia, I went on to Croatia. Picked up the white stag again, on the borders of Croatia. There's marshes there. And I had some really, really profound, beautiful experiences in Croatia. But I think I'm going to stop there. And maybe this is a short episode, but I'm going to stop there and share more about the rest of my journey along the coast. And thank you for listening. I know I've gone off at some tangents here, but I really appreciate being able to share the story of this journey. Okay, sending you much love from my heart to yours.